Nice to meet you.
Okay, you're good.
Thanks, Scott.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. I'm calling this meeting of the Providence School Board Policy Committee meeting to order. It is 4:48 p.m. on Wednesday, November 20th. Do I have a motion to approve the agenda?
Motion.
Seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. So approved. Do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda, which includes only one item, the approval of minutes from our August 2024 meeting?
So moved.
Seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Excellent. The minutes are approved. And so we will get right down to business now. Our first item on the policy and planning agenda is the school board policy process. We will be reviewing a policy that has not been revised since 2008. And we're going to hear from some folks, I believe, from Providence Public Schools. Please introduce yourself for the record and tell us about this policy.
James Scott, Director of Intergovernmental Affairs.
Nicole Leonian, Chief Equity Officer.
Scott Sutherland, Chief of Staff.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you.
So we're here tonight to present on the school board policy process. You are the, I believe, third policy chair we've worked with in the past couple of years, along with Dr. Santo and Dr. Robert Santana before you. And one thing that all three of you had flagged is the school board policy process, which is 205. And coming out of the state, in the next phase of state takeover, you wanted to have a sort of clear guidelines how we move a policy to fruition. So the last one was way outdated, so we took some fresh eyes at. Dr. Onier, Chief Sutherland, a number of other PPSD people looked at on our new internal policy review group, which Scott and Nicole will probably speak to in a few minutes. And we didn't make massive wholesale changes because policy is straightforward, but we did update to the modern template. We wrote a general belief, which kind of reflects what I think the school board would feel about that as a school board policy. We made some changes. The original policy was more of like the school board will write the policy, and that didn't, some of our discussions that didn't make a ton of sense. Although there are caveats for things like school board bylaws, school board code of ethics, which I think Vice President Escobar wrote with some of his colleagues, and some of the self-policing stuff makes sense for the board to write, but a lot of the policy is very content specific. So like special ed policy, you want the special ed team to write based off the state regulations and get different reviews on it. So it's been reframed. A lot of the language is some of the original language changes. We did add a definition section, which didn't exist in previous policy. And we have a guidelines for implementation, which I think Chief Sutherland wrote, talking about timely review of policy, because we're going to try to use this to hold ourselves to reviewing policies every 3 years. Sometimes there's challenges in doing that, but we're gonna try to at least be more honest and hold to that deadline. And we might also look at policies to be sunset or just completely antiquated. There's a handful of those. We also want to make a list of internal stakeholders and external stakeholders, community members. Dr. Onier, I think, contributed that piece where we want to, on certain things, engage the Equity Advisory Council, HAC, DWAC, the school board, Student Advisory Council, some of these other great community supports we have, depending on what the policy is. But the more review on we have, the better off we are. So we have one point of review, but this is a living document until its second passage. So for our guest, this will get recommended from policy committee, then the school board would have to pass it twice for it to become effective. It's a living document until that second passage. And you'll see the same thing mirrored on the city council side with city ordinances, where they have to pass those twice. So it's a living document. We can get some legal review in between this and the second read, because the first read is actually in a few minutes. and which normally isn't the way we operate, but sometimes you have to stack a committee meeting with regular meeting. That's what we are with it, and I don't know if either of my colleagues has anything to add to this.
No, I'll just build off of James on the list of internal stakeholders. We really did not have a support structure for school board members to actually, vet any policies through a team here at our school. So we working with James and Dr. Anya and other policy members. We asked for a representative from every department, so special ed, ESL, human resources, finance, to sit on a bi-weekly policy committee meeting internally, so we could review any policies that you wanted to bring forward to the school board, just so we could have all department eyes on it. This is the first one, our first iteration. We do have others in the queue as well. We thought with the transition back to local control, the new school board, that we could tackle this 205 board policy first.
I think they've said it all. The only thing I would say is that this is, I think, another example of how we're really very collaborative. We seek ways to be collaborative and also to be transparent, and also to build up on each other's ideas. Some of these policies, as James said, some of them are very old. It's important to be operating from policy, so also making sure that we are curating, looking at policies, those that are antiquated, those that may need revision, making sure we know where they are and what they are, to make sure that as we're making decisions based on policy. And then it's a great way of professional development, actually, because when you're at the table with stakeholders from all the departments reviewing these policies, it also brings some understanding and clarity to our work as well. So I think it's important. It's a policy. It's a committee that I'm really proud to be a part of. Good people, and shows that we all really have a common element to make sure that we're supporting our students and families as equitably as possible.
Thank you, Jean. Vice President Escobar, any thoughts or comments around the policy or the process?
The one thought I had was the communication of policy, and I guess it's just going to be more like just a practice for new board. It's just like when we have passed policies, it's kind of just like in this vacuum of just you got to be in the know type of thing, and it gets posted online. And I think it would be nice if there was a strategy where there was a press release for certain policies that were passed, and just communicating that out. Because I think even previous to this board, there's been a lot of work in policies and evolution of education. And I think the collective voices I've been on here is, and previous to that, championed a lot of that. But a lot of folks would be like, "Oh, what is the school board actually working on?" Right? And there's just no communication system between the work that happens in this room and just out in the community. I think that's why it's so easy for a community to go, "Well, what are you doing anyway?" Well, things get done. It's just not necessarily communicated out. So I don't know if this would be in this policy per se in terms of a press release or some sort of other external communication when we pass a policy, because there's some boring policies, right, that we wouldn't necessarily be like, it doesn't necessarily need to be press, or like we just updated a policy, we just change the sentence, but I think when we create new policies that we see as wins and it's good for our families, like communicating that out as well. So that was just more my thought.
I would echo that sentiment and say that perhaps we could, between first and second read, consider maybe an additional sentence under communicate the policy that maybe is not specifically a press release, but a commitment within this policy to broader communication and ensuring that especially students, family, and staff are aware when we've made a change to that policy manual. Right now, the language in this policy reads, the board shall communicate the new or amended policy to internal and external stakeholders through the official policy manual posted online on the district website. To me, that's a passive communication, meaning someone would sort of have to know to go look for that information, and it might help those values and goals of better collaboration and transparency if we were to commit as a board and district to doing some proactive communication.
For the new board too, I think, I don't know if this would be in here, but we talked about process of resolution. You know, like it's kind of just at the president's discretion in terms of putting resolutions on the agenda. But we've come in terms we've had situations where it's like, maybe we shouldn't do this, or we need more time, or we need legal to look into that. And I don't think there's any formal policy around just when can a board member submit a resolution, what sort of the guidelines beyond that. And I think that would be very helpful for, especially a lot of the new members that will come in a couple months from now. I could see folks using that tool pretty actively.
I think the resolutions are generally non-binding, and I think the challenge is what's concerned. I don't want to speak for the solicitor, but when resolutions come out, they're relative to things that are like in the courts, like that are being litigated or being passed by other laws. So maybe there's a caveat on that for like certain categories, or something from a judge. We hold off on the resolution, but I think that's I had some guidelines I drafted initially. We can maybe add these, or they can present them as an amendment at the before the second reading. Yeah, if there's minutes.
So resolutions within this policy?
It could be within this policy, right? Because I don't know, sometimes resolutions help inspire policy development, or it can be attempted to be acted as policy, depending on if we want to implement certain things, right? So I think it would be helpful. And I'm kind of tying in like this conversation with the next conversation, which is around just, what sort of issues should the policy committee tackle. And I really think it's a lot of foundational pieces for like the new members when coming on, like sort of education pieces, and this is a really good thing to tackle, right? Like the actual process of when bringing on policy. And I think the resolution piece is definitely helpful for those.
I think to clarify, Mr. Vice President, you kind of saw the resolution process maybe differently from some of your colleagues, where it was more like this bill's at the General Assembly, or this ordinance at the City Council, and things that maybe you want to voice your support for as a board. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I've used it in 2 instances to create a committee, right? So create a task force, right, for the district, and yes, an advocacy tool for it. And I think how it was used in the short time I was here before the takeover was in this advocacy tool space. And I could see new members coming on to use the resolution for both maybe in policy development, especially since they'll be still in their takeover, and let's say there's a disagreement, like, hey, we want to do X, Y, and Z, right? And I think secondary, so that advocacy, like State House. I think some guidelines on that would be helpful for folks.
I think that it would be helpful to talk with legal counsel to see whether there's a recommendation there of whether that should be a separate policy entirely, or whether that would make sense here. I'm wondering either way if perhaps we could address it in maybe the definition section and add a definition to what a resolution is, and making that distinction between resolution and policy. And one thing I don't see here is the term regulation under definitions, and I know that that's something that has been a conversation before. I know that my predecessor, Dr. Robert Santana, had done a presentation, I think a year or so ago, about sort of the way that those, at least the way that policy and regulations play off of one another, like what that relationship is, and then also thinking about a resolution as sort of a separate but related mechanism for the board to take action. And so it might be helpful to identify regulation and resolution here at minimum in this definition section, if not also as a separate or component of the policy. What do you think about that?
Did she draft anything around regulations? Was it like a deck? I'm just trying to.
I know that that was before my time, but I know that there was a slide deck that,
Okay, but it wasn't like an actual.
but I don't think that there was a formalized policy, was there? That was separate?
No, I believe in here it addresses regulations, page 4 or 5.
Yeah.
Um,
Under training, oversight, and communication.
So I see under policy development, it should be under there too, but the board should monitor policy implementation through executive monitoring reports and/or external audits provided on an ongoing basis, particularly individual policies. The report should provide evidence of policy effectiveness. So when we come back, we sort of report on it, and that with the regulations that give some of that, and I think we do probably have to add a 4th line on regulations. I thought I had probably some draft language in there, so we'll make sure we add that and call it out specifically.
I think it would be helpful, thank you, to do that, because I think the other thing that would be helpful for the current and future boards to understand is where our role is in the development of policy versus the development of the regulations. Where is that a collaborative process? Where is that being led at the district level? When is that being led at board level? Just spelling out some of that clarity of what our understanding is of that now. Do we have any other questions or concerns, or would we be ready to take a vote on whether to pass this for first reading?
Yeah, I motion to put this in first.
Okay, I will second that motion. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Excellent. So this brings this first read of the policy 205, school board policy process policy. That is a mouthful. And so we will hear more about or give an update and bring this to the full board at our meeting later this evening. Our next item on the agenda is a discussion relative to policy planning. I feel perhaps we have started to morph into that discussion a little bit. I wanted to take a moment in this discussion to talk about some of the policy accomplishments that this policy committee was able to do in this year. I know that this year as a board has been a little fraught and challenging as we are getting ready for everyone's terms to end at the end of December and shift to a hybrid model, and there's been a lot going on. But I want to name the many policies that this policy committee did help review and pass with the full board. In February, we passed the final version of our parent involvement policy updates, our summer school policy. In April, we passed, with lots and lots of work from Dr. Onye and her team in the equity office, the student code of conduct policy. In May, we passed a graduation policy that helped us be in compliance and update ourselves for the new statewide regulations that begin to apply with this year's freshman class, or class of 2028. We also passed, with lots of work from our internal departments and student supports, we passed a policy around suicide prevention, response, and recovery. In August, we passed a policy our community asked us for, which was an update to the previous 1991 school closing policy that added a lot of pieces that were missing in prior practice to really enhance community engagement and discussion when difficult decisions like that are on the table. And in September, we passed our use of students' public info materials and media, which was mostly an update or just refresh of that policy, and a brand new policy, again in close work with the equity office, called our reflection and prayer accommodation policy. Many of these policies went through beyond just the first and second reads. We had opportunity for public comment. We had opportunity for board members to respond and engage. And it was a collaborative effort between the district and this policy committee and the board as a whole to try to update our policies to serve our students well. So I wanted to take a minute to pat ourselves on the back collectively for that hard work. Even though some of these topics were difficult and intense and people had strong feelings about them, I think that that's a wonderful accomplishment. I'd love to hear more from this team here tonight to talk a little bit more. You touched on it earlier, Mr. Sutherland, around that policy team. Can you tell us again or in more detail the kinds of internal folks or departments? Tell us a little bit more about how those departments have this opportunity to work together on policy.
Okay. Well, Dr. Javier Martinez challenged me to improve some board services and to get more support for James Scott, who's pretty much running solo empty on all board services, finance. So what we did is we worked together, James and I, to actually bring a proposal to our senior cabinet level. And what we did is we asked for support for cabinet members or their team directly below them on the executive cabinet to sit in on both wellness, CTE, policy, finance, as well as our, as you run our AI committee. So we asked for representatives from every department to sit in on every board service committee. So that way they would have an internal facing team to look at what the school board would like us to focus on. So Travis can't run the AI by himself, so we have a team internally to support you now. Same thing with finances. Before anything comes to school board now, we have an internal team that reviews from the special ed lens, from the MLL lens, from the student support lens, from the finance lens, from the HR lens, from the equity lens, family and community engagement lens. So we started with the policy committee, and we really started to review. This is our first policy we reviewed collectively, but we do have other policies in the queue. And just having conversations about the policy and regulations between all committee members, we saw like a huge improvement and a lift to support James in his work, because he really was flying alone. And some of Dr. Anya has been at the meetings with us every week. We moved to a bi-weekly schedule, but just having input at all the levels and saying, oh my goodness, I didn't realize that with the translation policy, we have 3 different subgroups working on the same policy that's being translated in some cases. So it's really streamlined the work, and we hope that we'll be able to have it happen to support board services moving forward with an internal team. And then that also became our external team, because having the family and community engagement and the equity office, now Dr. Anya can take it to all of our equity groups, apply the equity lens to it. Between the equity office and the FACE office, now we have an avenue for PAC, for DWAC, for our teacher support, for our student team. So I think it's really going to improve the coordination and communication between the board and internal Providence, external Providence families.
I think that's great. I think thinking about 2025, you're gonna have 5 members. Well, all the members have specific regions associated to them, and I think especially those 5 that are elected. So I think it's really great on the internal. I would say and hope that there's collaboration on the external piece, whether that's a district, FACE office, or probably partnership with the city council, which is constituent services. Because like those 5 members, probably all 10, but those 5 members particularly, because they just ran, they're going to be messaged a lot from parents, students, community members, and they're going to deal with more constituent services, I think, than your average city council person. And that means those members are going to continuously they're like, hey, how do I do this? Work with FACE or whatever. So I don't know if it's necessarily policy, but like internal systems to support those folks, because it's just going to be more, I think, more eyes and more attention to the school board. So those folks need to be supported, and ideally, again, you would have more of a constituent services type of system, but we don't necessarily have that for school.
That's an interesting challenge, Mr. Vice President, because technically, the new appointed members too will also have a constituency, because they'll be
Yes.
each from a certain region.
Yes.
And then we have the dilemma where a board's different from a city council, is that the board only really has power when it's gavelled into session.
Mm-hmm.
And just how to kind of reconcile that and the new constituency universe of the school board will be kind of an interesting challenge. And hopefully the structures support that.
Yeah.
I'm going to be speaking more at our full board meeting later this evening, but I want to name that there is a group convening right now that includes folks from the Rhode Island Department of Education, from Providence Schools, from the school board, me right now, and from both city council and from Mayor Smiley's administration that is working together to talk about transition planning and what a return to local control and the new governance structure may look like. And this is one of the things that we've been tackling in our meetings thus far, is to think about how it's not just that there will be new members, but that the actual makeup or structure or expectations of the board have shifted or will be a little bit different. And so how can we now help set up systems and structures that will set up the new board for success, to be able to fulfill their duties well?
Mhm.
So all of these conversations converging together
Yeah.
is a good thing. I also want to name that we spoke at the full board back in, and I'll address this in more detail this evening, but we spoke at the full board back in August. That is when the Commissioner of Education and the Rhode Island Department of Education's Council on Elementary and Secondary Education, that's a mouthful, voted to extend the state intervention in Providence schools. And some of that recommendation was based on some consultant evaluation of how the board, the city, and the district function right now, and where there are challenges in getting ready for a return to local governance. And one of the things that was named there was the not sufficient yet coordination of departments. And so I really want to commend the team here tonight and everyone internal to Providence Schools that has been working to develop those relationships and to work collaboratively internally as well, because that might not be as visible to the general public. I think that's really good work that you're doing there. Does anyone else have anything they'd like to share relative to the discussion on policy planning? Vice President Escobar? I will entertain a motion to adjourn this meeting.
Motion to adjourn.
Seconded, all in favor?
Aye.
Excellent. This meeting is adjourned at 5:16 p.m. on Wednesday, November 20th. Thank you so much.
So, I think the first time hear this for school program. Carolyn tell you that I was not really good.
We need to know